Our financial system has a property I call financial gravity. As a founder, if you don't get your governance right, no other decision you make will matter for the long term because you won't be the one making the decision. It took them exactly 7 years to destroy what Saul had built in 20.
Hey everyone, it's Daniel from the Just Paid podcast. We have Dan Harshith and our guest, Eric Ries. I've been a big fan of Eric's work for a long time. Some of the history, just so why we reached out to you, honestly, Eric, was I would go into bookstores and your book would be everywhere on the shelf. Like the Lean Startup book is just like, I'd call it one of the most earliest game changers where a lot of people just didn't talk about startups. It wasn't a cool thing. People just didn't think about startups. It was kind of like a subversive culture out there. But you were kind of like beating a drum when the world just didn't, at least the United States just didn't really think about it as much as you have. And your book was out there and, it had a very memorable cover. Your older book, and you have a newer book coming out. But that was the primary reason we wanted you on, to like just talk to you about your new book, talk about some of your past, and just kind of dive in
Yeah,
to
sure.
your history and like why you're doing what you're doing. But I guess just to kick things off, like why write another book? What started you on the process? Like what made you do it?
I don't know. I ask myself this question all the time because, yeah, I can't remember who said this. Someone said writing is the saddest, loneliest thing in the world. Like there's something really solitary and difficult about it. And so every time I go through the process of writing a book, I'm sure I'll never do it again. And then here I am doing it again. Everything I write comes from pain. Okay, so just to be super clear, I only write about things that I personally have experienced and witnessed. I don't tell anybody to do things I haven't been willing to do myself. It's just not my style. So, if you think about Lean Startup, I had built companies like what I thought were really amazing products that, nobody wanted. And I had watched so many of my friends go through this process of really wasting people's time, building the wrong products, getting sucked into the ideology, the so-called best practices of waterfall development. And you guys remember those days? Like it was absurd, but that was considered the best practice. So much so that when I first started talking about Lean Startup, people thought I was crazy. I got yelled at so many times for preaching an impossibility. Like, you can never change this. It's never going to work. I remember for a long time when I was first doing this stuff, people would say things to me like, sure, that'll work for size X, but it'll never work for size 2X. And that was true for every size. Like when we were two guys in a garage, they say, sure, that'll work for two guys in a garage. Wait till you get to 10 people. When we get to 10 people, they'd be like, wait till you get to 20 people. When we get to 20 people, it's just absurd. I remember getting to like 200 people and then somebody be like, we'll never work at 400 people. It's like, okay, look, I don't think that this really makes sense. You just don't want to hear what I have to say, and it's okay. So, what started out as kind of like a grassroots thing, we started kind of talking about it and working with it. Like, there's some breakthrough companies started to embrace it. Anyway, then word started to get out, and eventually, we wound up writing the book, and the book became the vehicle for the ideas to really cross the chasm into mainstream awareness, as you're talking about. So I want to be super clear about this because Lean Startup is now 15 years old. I'm very proud of it. Okay, I'm really happy about what happened. I really enjoy the work that I get to do as a result. I'm proud of the thousands upon thousands of founders that have embraced it and used it to create incredibly meaningful companies, but also like a lot of personal net worth. A lot of people who've made more money than they and their kids and their grandkids would ever need from embracing these ideas. But I've also seen the dark side of this business, the side that I feel like we don't talk about nearly enough, which is that many of these companies, though they may make some amount of money for some amount of time, they lose something. They lose that spark that made them special. They get surgically deboned. They go from being idealistic and strong and bold to being cowardly big companies, Like it's so gross. And I say in the book, if I tell you that a company, a favorite brand of yours, has succumbed to big co disease, you know what I mean. I don't have to specify. I don't have to specify. We've all lived this. It's actually happening across our economy more and more and more often. In fact, I had someone say to me the other day about a favorite brand of theirs. I said, "Wow, I really hope they're super successful." And then the person was like, "Actually, wait, hold on. What I meant to say was, I hope they're successful enough to make money, but not successful enough to be bought by private equity." I was like, "Why is that?" "Well, we all know what happens if they get bought by private equity." I said, "Yeah, of course I do." But I said, "Oh, like what?" And they started rattling off company after company after company after company that they loved that now sucks because of its ownership structure. And if you talk to people about why is this going on, a lot of people are like, well, that's investors. But that never made sense to me. Why would investors want to destroy companies? That doesn't make sense. In fact, spoiler alert, if you read the book, you will find out that many, many, many of today's best practices about how companies should be built, structured, or governed are actually value destroying. even though they're being enacted in the name of shareholders. And the more I learned about that, the more I thought, this sucks. Like, we can't just tolerate this state of affairs. Now, I'm an entrepreneur, so of course I've tried to fix it myself. I have done a bunch of things, including the building of a company called the Long-Term Stock Exchange, where I've tried to bring this kinds of reforms into our public markets. And just as a result, I've been there. I've seen some things, okay, since Lean Startup came out. I feel like I've been on the Heart of Darkness tour. I've seen the belly of the beast. I've seen how the system works up close and personal. And it took me a lot of years to realize that the emperor has no clothes. The system seems so indomitable. It's the people who run it seem so smart, and they wear fancy suits, and they are so well credentialed. But I don't think it makes that much sense. And I think I understand now what we have to do if we want to live in a completely different economic climate, a completely different economic environment, especially as founders, because at the end of the day, it is founders who hold the power to change or endorse the status quo.
When you wrote the book, it seemed like you thought it was a given that we'd be changing the world for good. That was sort of the energy
Yeah.
there in Silicon Valley. What changed for you? Was there a specific company that broke your heart?
No, it was an accumulation of things. I mean, I tell a bunch of these stories in the book, like, take Twilio, for example, one of my favorite companies. Jeff Lawson's a great founder, made so much money for his investors, so much money. And when he took the company public, he acted as what I call in the book, the mission guardian. He took on the responsibility and said, I will make sure this company stays true to its mission. And it did. It grew to unbelievable heights. If you remember the telecom boom during the pandemic, Twilio was worth it was outrageously overvalued. And then when that bubble collapsed, the stock price collapsed. Now, it just so happened that the dual class shares that protected Twilio, that he had negotiated with his partners and investors, had been set up to have a 7-year sunset from the time of the IPO, which means that after 7 years, they would go away and Twilio would revert to standard governance. Now, would you guys like to guess how many days elapsed between the expiration of these special protections and the day that Jeff Lawson was ousted as the CEO of Twilio?
One
0.
day.
You guys are underestimating a little bit, but not by a lot. It took 199 days. They didn't even wait 1 year before they did it because, it just happened to be the stock price was down, and we live in a culture that's like, oh, stock price down, knee-jerk reaction. But although the stock price was down, revenue wasn't down. Customers, employees weren't down. Like, the whole thing made absolutely no sense. People always say, well, he must have made some mistakes. I'm sure he did. But really, like, he deserves so little grace. 199 days after building this company up to its tens of billions of dollars in valuation. We've gotten to a place now where we're all supposed to pretend that we think all the different ways of making money are equally good, but nobody really does. I rarely hear anyone who secretly, privately actually thinks that. And so those of us who share what I call the builder's intuition, that the right way to make money, the best way to make money is to create new value in the world and then capture a little bit of it for yourself. We have to start, the courage and the comfort to say that out loud. And the next time someone says, well, these activists who destroyed this company, you got to hand it to them. They made a lot of money, so I guess it works. It's like, no kidding, it works. Extracting value from what other people make is easy. But why? Why would we want to reward that? And why would we want to support an economic system that is destroying so many great organizations? So the book is Incorruptible, why good companies go bad and how great companies stay great. And it's kind of structured not like a business book, though it kind of starts out that way to make people comfortable. To me, it's more like a mystery. It's a double mystery. If it's really true that these best practices destroy value, why do investors go along with it? Like, why would investors want to destroy value? That doesn't make sense by the ideology of capitalism. Capital is supposed to be about competition and value creation. Why has this been going on for hundreds of years? I have case studies in the book going back hundreds of years. Why? But far more important to me is the second mystery. When you ask people, why does this happen? Why does private equity destroy companies? Well, how come companies turn to crap after they go public? You read Cory Doctorow's and shitification, for example. You read lots of these stories. Most people will say, well, I guess it's just human nature. It's greed. Once companies get to a certain size, once they get to a certain age, once they get this, it's just inevitable that this happens. But here's the second mystery of the book. If it's inevitable, why are there exceptions? Why are there companies that have been going on for decades, some for past the century mark, without being affected by this supposedly universal force? And what's interesting to me, having helped create some of those companies, but studying quite a lot more, is if you look at them, they violate almost every so-called best practice that we teach people is the best way to build companies. And that's the secret to their longevity. They just don't do the things we teach people to do. So given that we have enough of those exceptions to build a data set, given that that data set has been studied by academics and found to be superior to the standard structure, why is the standard structure the standard? If it's not the best one, why do we adopt it as the best practice? So my goal with this book is just to say enough with this. We actually know enough as builders to say this is the better way to build organizations that can last, that can create more value for everyone they touch, including their investors, and that will allow us to all sleep a little bit better at night. Seems like a pretty good trade to me.
So, Eric, just jumping in right there, I just wanted to touch base on this concept of planned obsolescence, right? And you also mentioned something about like human nature and an aspect of greed here. Do you think there's always there'll definitely come a time in a company's ownership when they understand they have captured enough of the market and now they have control of the market and now they can just deliberately make the products less feasible, less durable,
Oh, yeah.
and it's less functional, right? And also had a counterpoint about what you just shared. I would love to learn your inputs on this. You also mentioned that there definitely are companies that live longer, like more than 100 years, just standing right there with their values. Do you also think there's a lot of change of ownership happening right there? Do you think it's a cycle of ownership change and all of that coming in? So, if you can just touch base on both of these points, would love to hear from you.
Yeah, remind me of the first point again.
Yeah, a planned obsolescence.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, okay. So look, it's absolutely the case that the people teach this as a business best practice. The Boston Consulting Group has been teaching the cash cow strategy for decades. You get to a position where you can extract money and nobody can do anything about it. Jim Sinegal, the founder of Costco, calls it the business equivalent of taking heroin. You do it once and you get away with it and it works. And you're like, ooh, this is sweet. But then you got to do it again because now that new profit you just made is now baked into your growth forecast for the future. And next thing you know, you have become an utter monster. Now, this question of whether what are the conditions that are needed for this to happen is really interesting. Rory Sutherland, the great British ad man, has a lot of great videos on this point because he really, I think, understands this idea that we've built an economy where people get rewarded for cutting costs, but not held accountable for the brand and quality consequences of cutting costs. So we have all these people who make money in the short term, but never held accountable for the devastation they wreak in the long term. He said basically, like his perspective was only family-run companies seem to be able to resist this temptation. He's listing all these family-run companies, Ford and Mars and Toyota, and those companies are, they're not structured around the public markets. They don't have quarterly targets. They're not ROI driven. They're blah 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 blah. Hey, he's this long rant, and at the end he says, "Oh, and also Costco." Costco's not family run, but they also seem to be able to do this. And I'm like, oh, time out. Excuse me. How can there be an exception? You just said only, but why is Costco on the list? And in fact, there's a lot of Costcos in this world. Can I tell you a story? Okay. So understand how the magic trick works. It's really helpful to understand the deep origin of Costco. Okay, not the surface level story, but let me give you the prehistory, the backstory. Okay. I'm going to tell you the legend of a guy named Saul Price. You guys know Saul Price?
No.
In retail circles, Saul is a legend, but I think outside of retail, a lot of people don't know him. Saul was the father of modern retail. Okay. He's so influential that if you've ever wondered to yourself, when Sam Walton was thinking about starting a retailer, why did he call it Walmart? He was paying tribute to Saul's company, FedMart. That's what he said. FedMart was the original big box retail store. It was started in San Diego in the 1950s by Saul Price. Now, Saul was a lawyer before he became a retailer. And then he kind of came to entrepreneurship late in life. And so when he was a lawyer, he was trained that he had what's called a fiduciary duty to his client. And that means he's required to put the client's interest before his own. When he became a retailer, he asked himself a simple question: who's my client? To him, it was very obvious that the client was the customer. So he built a business based on the principle of fiduciary duty to the customer. To give you illustrate what that meant, if competitors would use the product dumping strategy to sell a loss leader, you ever seen this where a retailer will say, oh, I'll just sell a product for below my cost, use that to drive my competitors out of business, and then I can jack up prices later, to your point about planned obsolescence. Once I'm the monopoly, I can do whatever I want. I can't believe people teach monopoly as an intentional business strategy. So antisocial. So when they would do this to him, instead of getting mad, Saul would put up signs in his own store saying, this product is cheaper down the street. Don't buy it from me. His competitors just drove him crazy. But he's like, look, I'm a fiduciary to the customer. If they can get it cheaper from someone else, I want them to get it cheaper. That's my job, to get them a good deal. So as a result, people loved FedMart. People would drive miles out of their way. Saul paid above average wages. He capped margins at 14%. He believed in what he called the intelligent loss of sales, meaning he carried only limited SKUs and only products that he judged to be of high quality. He had a very particular ethos, a philosophy of business, and it worked. So much so that FedMart went public and had all problems you can imagine. Whereas Saul believed in low prices and high wages, the public markets drove him crazy. The quarterly reporting, the pressure was always on. There was this gravitational pressure to betray the principles, to do what you're talking about, planned obsolescence, right? Like cheat, basically just cheat his customers because he could get away with it. He wanted low prices and high wages. The market always wanted high prices and low wages. Saul found this intolerable. He was a real uncompromising SOB. So he took the company private. He arranged with new investors to buy out all the public market investors and take the company private, which he did. But it didn't solve his problem. The new board, this is now the 1970s, the new board was under the sway of these governance best practices, the idea that's called shareholder primacy. Saul thought he ran the company, but they're like, no, man, the board runs this company, and the board is designed to squeeze customers for the benefit of shareholders. So what did they want? What did the new board want? You'll be shocked. They wanted faster growth. They wanted higher prices and lower wages. They wanted conventional best practices. So they're fighting with Saul all the time. You probably can guess where this is headed. One day in 1975, after Saul has been building FedMart for more than 20 years, he comes into work and he can't get into his office because the locks on the door have been changed. He doesn't work there anymore. So it's one of the perfect A-B split tests you'll ever see in business history, because here's what happened next. In the red corner, in corner A, wearing the blue trunks, we have the investors in FedMart. They got what they wanted. They got Saul out of the way, and FedMart was changed. It adopted the best practices. It pursued faster growth, and all in the name of profit. It took them exactly 7 years to destroy what Saul had built in 20. It was literally bankrupt by 1982. So let's see what happened in the red corner. In corner B, wearing the red trunks, we have Saul Price. What did he do? He was a classic entrepreneur. He didn't complain that life was unfair. He took 2 weeks off, and then he was back to work. He literally leased the office upstairs from FedMart in the same building and started again. He built a new company that he called Price Club. And although today Price Club is largely forgotten, when I was growing up, Price Club was a huge, successful retailer because Saul understood that this was an engine that he could restart because he understood how to build a company that people trusted. Now, the reason you haven't heard of Price Club, though, despite its success, is because of something else that happened in 1975. See, Saul wasn't the only person that quit in protest of what had happened at FedMart. Also, one of his executives, a guy named Jim Sinegal, also quit. Jim had worked his way up from stock boy to executive at FedMart, and he went to work with Saul at Price Club. He also understood this engine, and so a few years after this, he decided to strike out on his own with Saul's blessing and start his own company to prove that the engine could work in more places in America. And that company also was very successful. In fact, so much so that a few years after that, the two companies would later merge into a company that they called Price Costco. But we just call Costco. Now you know where Costco comes from. Today, Costco is a $400 billion public company, and yet it still practices the ethos of Saul Price, the capped margins, the intelligent loss of sales, the higher than average wages, the fiduciary duty to the customer. In fact, to give you a sense of how big Costco is, because if you're not a retail geek, you might not know this. You guys know, have you ever seen Costco's house brand, Kirkland Signature? See it a lot in startup offices all over this country.
Yep.
If Kirkland Signature was its own company, it would be bigger than United Airlines, bigger than Procter & Gamble, and bigger than Coca-Cola. Okay, it's a huge company unto itself, and it's just a tiny part of the Costco empire. So I tell you this story because a lot of people hearing it are like, well, that's great. I've always wondered why Costco seems like they're so much better than other companies. But how come FedMart was destroyed, whereas Costco is going on 40 years now? And the answer is that in order to build a company that is incorruptible, it's not enough just to have a good intention like Saul had. You do need that ethos, the ethos of Saul Price, but you need a second ingredient, an ingredient I call integrity. Saul had high integrity as a person, but FedMart, the company, was too weak to have integrity. So what is integrity? Integrity means the ability to make and keep a promise. When Saul promised that he was a fiduciary to the customer, he ultimately couldn't keep this promise because investors were able to decapitate the company at will. Although investors have tried many times to do this to Costco, they cannot because Jim Sinegal built it with what's called a governance fortress, a series of institutional protections that guard it against external pressure. And so this combination, the ethos of Saul Price and the integrity of Jim Sinegal, you put those two pieces together, you can build a company that can endure for quite a long time.
Looking at the track record of the long-term stock exchange, I mean, it's formidable, but it doesn't seem like it's on track to being able to fundamentally fight the greed within human nature and the disincentives, right? Is there something else that needs to be built or done?
Oh, so many things. Yeah. Look, we're not in a fight against human natures. Just for the record, like these techniques that I'm talking about work with human beings that we have today. We have to build companies and build institutional structures that work with the world as it does today. But
Right.
here's the thing, like people aren't more or less greedy now than they were in 1986 or in 1926. Like that's been a universal part of human nature. Now, I do think we as founders tend to be very naive about what is waiting for us in the financial system. Our financial system has a property I call financial gravity that is not just greed, but a very specific force that acts on organizations, warping their structure. And if we don't build strong enough institutions, we are guaranteed to wind up with an organization that basically is warped the way that gravity dictates. If you imagine you hired me as an engineer, right? Imagine, Dan, you were like, I got this bridge and it collapsed. Eric, can you come give me a diagnosis? What went wrong with my bridge? I was like, sorry, gravity. I'm like, Eric, you suck. You're like the worst engineer I ever heard of. Like, of course. I mean, yes. And I'll be like, what? It's true. Gravity is what pulled it down to the bottom of the valley. You're like, no, but that's not what I'm asking you. Why did it fall down today? It didn't fall down yesterday, and there was gravity yesterday. And the Costco bridge down in the other valley, it's still strong. How come it's still going and my bridge collapsed? Oh, you want me to analyze what makes a bridge strong? Well, let's see. Let's study wind load. Let's study tension. Let's study material fatigue. And I go examine the parts. Oh, look here. All the metal bolts in your bridge have been corroded and rusted. That's why it collapsed. You say, well, gosh, I guess there's nothing I can do about it. Bullshit. Why don't we build the next bridge with stainless steel? Then it won't get corroded, right? And you're like, oh, okay. So to me, what is the organizational equivalent of stainless steel? Those are the ingredients we have to learn as founders, as builders, as leaders, as board members, as customers. We have to learn to master those building materials, those techniques, so that the organizations we build do not have this corrosion that takes them apart.
I know that by financial gravity, you're referring to like the various pressures that accumulate as a company grows. I know you've said in the past that you need to create these directions of doing like the long-term thinking and all the right things far ahead of when you think you should. And I'm with you. I think that's viable and it does make the world a better place. But the question is, how do we actually make more companies do this? I mean, we could talk about it. We could bring more information to the public. But is there something more that we can do? Like we're always reaching for leverage as founders. This is a great framework and a great concept, and I want to do it myself, like before my company gets any further
Yeah.
along. But how can we actually scale this impact aside from talking about it and writing about it?
The why is actually only part one. It's only a relatively small part of the book. The vast majority of the book, parts 2 and 3, are all very detailed techniques that founders, leaders, board members can apply to organizational design. And I would say, broadly speaking, they come into two components: that ethos component, the Saul Price kind of stuff, and the structural components, the Jim Sinegal kind of stuff. Before I tell you the details of how to do it, because it can be a little wonky, can I tell you one more story? Okay. I took you back to 1970s and the 1950s. I'm going to take you back to the 1920s. So I want you to imagine it's 1920. You're Marie Krogh. You're a doctor, and you live in Denmark. Okay. One of the first female doctors actually in Denmark, a big advocate for women's medical education. She was a very cool lady. But today she's mostly famous because of her husband. She's married to a guy who just won the Nobel Prize. So pretty cool. But bad news, you've just been diagnosed with a fatal illness for which there is no known cure. And it's sad. The disease is diabetes, which at the time could not be cured. But your husband asks you anyway if you will accompany him on a lecture tour of North America. And dutiful wife that you are, you go with him. So August and Marie set out from Denmark to North America, and they travel all around America, he's giving lectures about his Nobel Prize, and they're meeting all these other eminent scientists. Well, at dinner one night, Marie meets a scientist who says, oh, you should know there's these Canadian scientists, and they have figured out how to isolate insulin for the first time, a medical breakthrough. So she convinces her husband that they should extend their trip to go to Canada and see this technology for themselves. So they go to see the breakthrough. They do. They're both scientists, so they kick the tires on it. They see that it's real, and they get real excited because not only could this save Marie's life, they can see the potential to save millions more. So they ask the Canadians if they can license the technology and bring it back to Denmark to commercialize it. And the Canadians agree, but everyone involved on that fateful day has a concern. Let's imagine that you make a life-saving medicine that I need to live. In that situation, I would want you to charge me a fair price for this medicine because I want you to make money. I want you to have every possible incentive to keep making this medicine that I depend on for my life, right? But the Crows and the Canadians had this worry. Well, what if one day you wake up and you're like, wait a minute, I don't have to charge Eric a fair price. Remember what Harsh was asking me before about planned obsolescence? Your life could be my planned obsolescence. You say, wait a second, or no, you have to pay me every dollar you have. Otherwise, gosh, it'd be a shame if you couldn't get access to this medicine, right? So decades before Martin Shkreli, they were worried about this exact situation. So they said it's unethical to take a scientific research because they saw science as a public trust. Scientific research should not be embodied in a pure for-profit company. So they came up with a structure to prevent that from happening. They created their new company in Denmark called the Nordisk Insulin Laboratorium as a for-profit company that was a subsidiary, a wholly owned subsidiary of the Nordisk Foundation. So a nonprofit foundation that owned a for-profit subsidiary. This structure is called the Industrial Foundation structure. It's not actually new. It was not invented by the Crows for the first time. For example, the German optics company Zeiss, Daniel, that makes your lenses most likely, had this structure in 1885. Okay, so this is actually like relatively old idea, but it's kind of fallen out of modern practice. People forget about it, even though we have these examples where it works out really well. So that's what they did. That if Nordisk Insulin Laboratorium sounds familiar to you, it should, because this is, of course, the progenitor company of Novo Nordisk, which today is one of the world's largest companies, and yet still has this structure, even though Novo Nordisk is a publicly traded company. Trades, I think, 1 million shares a day on the New York Stock Exchange. And in fact, all the things like that people have tried to do to mess up companies, like what happened to Jeff Lawson, what happened to FedMart, people tried that with Novo Nordisk over the last 100 plus years, but the attacks just bounced right off. And in fact, I tell a story in the book that I know when I tell you guys right now, just be honest with me. I think you're going to say, that sounds like a total exaggeration, but I swear this is the true, honest story. You can read it for yourself. There was a time not that long ago when the nonprofit trustees of Novo Nordisk had to intervene to stop the for-profit company from doing something. And because of their intervention, they created more than $500 billion of shareholder value. So when people say, like, what can I do? It's kind of an open secret. We know what to do. These structures, and Novo is not the only such one. In the book, I discuss many, many, many similar structures that can protect a company, protect its mission for the long term. We actually know them, and there's enough of them that we have a data set. We can analyze. You can ask a question like, companies that have this structure, how do they perform financially compared to companies that have the conventional structure? Well, we know. For example, companies with this structure are 6 times more likely to live to year 50. We're talking about 10% probability versus 60% probability compared to conventional structures. So if you tell me I want to create a world-changing company that my grandkids will be proud that I started, why not structure it in the way we know from the evidence works to achieve that goal?
Wish they had they have a Delaware C Corp, an LLC, an S Corp. They have all these different type of corporations. I wish there was like a structure that like imposed legally what you're proposing
Yeah,
into it,
yeah,
because
yeah.
it's so hard to start a company. Everybody in this room, we all know how hard it is. It's like at the inception, you're just kind of getting it off the ground to get users to love it. It's so much stress. Even thinking about that other component, there needs to be DNA we've woven in, like Y Combinator has their, they give you money, they get you off the ground, they give you a safe note, which protects the founder in some ways to like get the company off the ground. Is there a proposal? Like, do you have documents you're envisioning in
Mhm.
your head that people will be
Oh, sure.
given?
No, you don't. What's
Yeah.
awesome about this is you don't have to wait. People have already pioneered all the documents that you need. So, like, I tell in the book the story of when the Anthropic founders came to see me after leaving OpenAI. Like, we did this, and their docs are they're not a secret. You can look them up. There's something in the U.S. There's something called the Public Benefit Corp in Delaware. There's something called the Perpetual Purpose Trust. We have these legal forms already. Now, what's interesting to me is you say, well, as a founder, I'm just trying to get my company off the ground. I don't have time to worry about this kind of stuff. But it's so interesting that people adopt that attitude because we don't, in no other aspect of entrepreneurship do we preach this. Even Lean Startup, with all our discussion of MVPs, vision is always the primary thing. What's the vision, the long-term vision for this thing? Why can't the vision include the kind of company you want it to be? I think we have like bifurcated operation, strategy, vision, business model away from governance, structure, investors, the legal stuff to our detriment. Actually, in the book, I argue that as a founder, if you don't get your governance right, no other decision you make will matter for the long term because you won't be the one making the decision. So if that bothers you, if you have that concern, yeah, you got to get with it. Now, in the book, I have very detailed guidance. There's literally a section called How to Talk to Your Lawyer about this. There's a section called How to Talk to Your Investor about this. Okay, so I understand it. For people hearing this for the very first time, it sounds intimidating, but I've been doing this for years now. I've helped dozens of people adopt this structure. Not all of them are as famous as Anthropic, but like still like going fine. And I really think we as an industry could standardize on these documents. And in fact, if you scan the QR code in the book, you can get we have implementation guides that include these templates and stuff like that. So I've really tried to make it as easy as possible. I got so frustrated about this a couple of years ago. I actually started a new law firm. So if you go to tryvirgil.com, you could actually sign up for the Virgil law firm, where one of the things we do is help people with this, although we also do a lot of other back office stuff powered by AI, so you don't have to pay by the hour. So anyway, I really believe in this, and I really feel like I put my money where my mouth is, and I just feel like the evidence is really unequivocally clear that this is the right thing. So what we have to do is grapple with the fact. Like I always ask people to ask themselves this question: why are you having to hear about this from me? Okay, so like you have all these lawyers, advisors, investors, bankers. Think about all the people in your life that have given you advice that are like well credentialed to do so. The Y Combinator guys, like all these guys. Zeiss had this structure in 1885. How come you were finding out about it on this podcast today? Right? What's going on here? How is this not more widely known? And so I ask people to ask themselves this simple question. Next time you're talking to some fancy person who seems like they really know what they're talking about, just ask yourself this question. Are you sure they're smarter than a Nobel laureate? Because August and Marie worked this out more than 100 years ago and it's still going strong. Meanwhile, many of the best practices these people are trying to get you to adopt are younger than the trees in your local park.
So just to jump in right there, Eric. So I believe knowledge has been democratized in the age of LLMs. All of
Mm.
us with a local LLM, we can just download that on our simple MacBook and then run a large language model with an entire world's knowledge on it, right? So the LLMs do know this. So we do have access to all of this
Sure.
information, but
Go ask
I
Claude.
think there's something
Yeah, ask Claude deep research if the things I just said are true. You don't even have to read the book. No big deal. Yeah, like this is not like doesn't need to be a secret. You may as well take advantage of all this knowledge, please.
actually read this book, which was written in 1983 by Buckminster Fuller. It was
Mhm.
called Grunge of Giants, and what it stands for is Gross Universal Cash Heist. So what it means is we have all the resources that we need for the entirety of humanity to live the best, amazing lives, and just to add value to each other. But there's still something stopping us. I mean, there's some kind of a loop, which basically is an 80-20 principle, like a Pareto's principle, right? So
Mhm.
80% of people work for 20% and 20% hoard 80% of the wealth. Like, what are your thoughts on this one? Like, can we ever get out of this loop?
I want to answer your question, but I'm going to sound so crazy to you. You're going to be like, "Oh, what happened to Eric's credibility?" Because yeah, I think we can, and I actually think it's easier than people think. You're going to have to read the whole book to see the argument, which I lay out in great detail, but I'll give you the short version of it now. So we live in the era of what's called shareholder primacy. The idea that an organization, like when we create a company as a founder, this theory states this is not a beautiful living organism. No, this is a financial instrument designed to enrich those who are already wealthy. Okay, that's what it is. And if you ask yourself, why is this the law? Like, this is the law in the United States. If you make a Delaware C Corp, I give the example, if a really evil company, like your least favorite company in the world, comes to try to buy you and they're willing to pay $1 more per share than it's worth, you have to sell it. It's your legal obligation. You have a fiduciary. Saul Price talked about being a fiduciary to the customer. In this case, you're a fiduciary to the auctioneer. You must sell your company to the highest bidder. It's absurd. And it doesn't matter what they plan to use it for. Are they going to shut it down like the original electric car companies? Are they going to kill it like in pharma, we have what are called killer acquisitions that are designed to destroy the R&D practices of rivals. That's like well documented. Doesn't matter. You have fiduciary duty. So where did this idea come from? Now, most people have been taught that shareholder primacy is a natural law. It's an essential ingredient in capitalism. It's necessary for global markets to function, right? You guys are familiar with this? Would you be surprised to learn that for the vast majority of the years there have been joint stock corporations, it was seen as completely obvious that companies should be incorporated to do something specific. They had to have what's called a beneficial purpose. So, for example, in the 19th century in America, I'm not talking about communist Russia here, in America, in the 19th century, if you were the world's richest person and you tried to forcibly take over a company and turn it into something different, you would face obstacles that you don't face today. First of all, the board would be permitted to resist you. It would not be considered obvious that they have to sell to you no matter how much money you offer them. But even more importantly, if you decided to take over, say, a railroad, or in the case of the Erie Canal, a canal company, and you said, I'm going to change its legal purpose from making a canal to enriching shareholders, that would have been considered a crime. The courts would void your charter and give you the corporate death penalty. That's how far we've come in a very short time. What's called general incorporation, the more modern idea, dates only to 1899. But in 1899 in Delaware, when they enacted general incorporation, they just democratized access to the incorporation function of society. They still believed you should have to say what the company was for. It's just that over the course of the 20th century, companies more and more often started writing in as if any of you have a company, go read the charter. I bet you've never read your own corporate charter. Go read it. It will say something like, the Acme Corporation is hereby incorporated to pursue any lawful act or activity. See, people just started filling in the blank with anything. And then, starting in the 60s, 70s, and formalizing in the 80s, courts started to interpret anything to mean shareholder primacy. Now, here's the really wild part about this story. This is why I'm so optimistic. The idea of shareholder primacy has never, in the history of the world, ever been subject to a single popular referendum. General incorporation that it replaced was fought state house by state house over the course of the 19th century, and therefore is a very legitimate idea. Shareholder primacy was decided by a very small number of legal scholars, judges, and academics. Why? Because they thought it made more sense than the alternative. That means if you look today and you ask people, why is this the law? If you ask legal scholars, why do I have to follow this law if there's not a law? Like, if I learned in school that how a bill becomes a law, if a law is so universal that it affects every single company on this planet, surely somebody would have written it down, right? We would have had a chance to vote on it, right? Wrong. No. And so here's the crazy part. If you read the legal scholarship about shareholder primacy, they say things like this. They say, well, okay, so it's not written down, but at this point, shareholder primacy is what they call a normative consensus, meaning everybody who matters basically agrees that this is not just how companies currently act. That would be a descriptive consensus. No, this is a description of how companies ought to act, how they should act. So all these things that we experience that we hate, private equity ruining our favorite brand, companies getting like all this extraction everywhere is powered by this idea that this is a normative consensus. But if you feel like I'm not part of that normative consensus, you're allowed to say so. The nice thing about a normative consensus is anybody saying they disagrees breaks the consensus. In order for this idea to keep promulgating, it requires everybody to say to themselves, well, I'm not part of the consensus, but everybody else is, and I don't want to get, it would be bad for my career to say. Like, I always talk to people who are like, people who are on boards or want to be on boards one day, they're like, I'll never be able to get on a board if I say that out loud, so I better pretend to think this is a good idea. It's going to help my career. And if you look at the history of authoritarianism, which obviously is very relevant in this day and age, you will discover lots of times in history where these kinds of consensus wrong ideas take hold. And everyone thinks, oh, I'm too afraid to say anything about it. And then somebody speaks up. And sometimes, sometimes it's a prominent person who writes a book or whatever, but far more often, that's in the background. What really matters is some everyday ordinary person says, you know what, I'm just going to say what I actually believe. And so one of the pieces of homework I've been giving people lately is tomorrow, whoever listening to this, just do one thing. Tomorrow, tell anybody you meet tomorrow. Just tell a friend. You don't have to get up on a soapbox. You don't have to yell at your board or anything. Just tell one friend, hey, Daniel, listen, I just want to let you know I'm not part of the normative consensus in favor of shareholder primacy. You might be surprised. Daniel might be like, you know what, Eric, actually, I'm not either. Oh, what's that? Now there's two of you. If you each do it, maybe now there's four of you. You never know what might cause the cascade that would allow us all to wake up out of the stupor and say, no, we're not doing this. This is silly. Now, one last thing I'll say. I promise every single idea in this book is something you can do today. So although now we're talking about how to puncture this veil, this fake consensus on shareholder primacy, you don't have to wait for that to build a company where the company is committed to different principles. We actually already have those legal tools, and the book shows you how to use them.
Got it. So it's giving you the application on how to really make your company just the longevity of it sustainable.
If that's your goal.
And as you're talking, I'm thinking of companies like I don't know if you may not know this person, but Judy Faulkner, she created Epic. Epic is basically one of the software vendors in healthcare
Oh, sure, I know them.
that's
Yeah.
out there, and they're very
I
predominant.
thought you meant Epic the Musical by Jorge Rivera.
Oh,
Harris.
no. But, I've heard, like, she doesn't wanna take the company public, like, she was
Yeah,
trying to
of
structure it a
course.
different way, and I'm like, there are people that just innately understand the trajectory if you take your company this certain path. It sounds like you're saying it always corrupts the company at some point, it just falls apart. I guess one question for you, like, super voting shares, like, Mark Zuckerberg does stuff, and, a lot of people disagree with what he does, but he has, like, super voting shares in his company, so he's kind of, like, running it. It sounds like you're talking the founder shouldn't have, like, full power. You're saying that there's, like, a DNA woven into the company to protect it, and there's an agreement at the beginning of the company versus, like, a founder-driven
Yeah.
company.
Somebody has to be the mission guardian. Founder is better than nothing, so nobody is the worst answer. But founder by themselves has a lot of problems, as Mark Zuckerberg's very apparent mental health challenges can attest. It's very stressful and can leave you really feeling stuck for your life, like you become like an indentured servant. So founder control is better than nothing, but it is, I don't think, the end state. It's not the final form of what this should look like. And the other thing that you said that I think is really important to understand is, although, of course, some of these techniques are a lot easier to implement if you do them at the beginning, of course, it's never too late to do it. In fact, one of the principles in the book is this principle I call it's always too early until it's too late. What happens is people put this stuff off thinking they have plenty of time. They can always do it at the Series A, do it at the Series C, do it in the pre-IPO, do it in the IPO. People always get talked out of it. When you talk to bankers, lawyers, advisors, and say, I want to do this stuff, in the law, these are called mission protective provisions. I want to enact mission protective provisions. Your lawyer will be like, oh, that's nice, sweetheart, but don't worry about that right now. And you're like, well, I'm worried. I'm asking people to trust me. We're going to be replacing their vital organs with AI or whatever. I want to make sure they know I will always take care of them. And your lawyer will be like, I know, they just put that in your marketing. That's okay. Like, no, but here in the document, it says any lawful act or purpose. I feel like they might ask me, like, well, does that include turning me into Soylent Green and feeding me to the data centers? Like, I'd like to be able to say no. If you try this exercise, your lawyer will say, you never know what you might need to do. So maximum optionality comes from just leave it be standard. So anyway, so you get talked into that. You're like, okay, and you say, look, when do I have to decide? They say, not really now. You can always do it at the Series A. Okay, do the Series A. Do the Series A. Talk to the investors. They're like, yeah, we're aligned with you. So since we're aligned and we're founder friendly, we don't really need to just like extra expense, complexity. Let's just do it later. You raise a growth round. The bold contrarians on your board are like, you don't want to look too different from other companies. It might make it hard to raise money. Like, when did that? I'm like, what? I thought you were a bold contrarian. Now you want me to be the same as everybody else? Okay. Now you're doing IPO prep. You've got a CFO. You have a banker. You have a general counsel. You have like this huge team. You say, team, this is important to me. Make sure we do this stuff. They're like, yes, sir. But we'll bundle it into the IPO, which we're going to do next year or 2 years from now, whatever. Anyway, now it's IPO execution time. You're about to go on the roadshow and you ask your CFO, hey, buddy, remember that mission protective provisions that I told you about I wanted to do? Did we ever get around to that? And he's like, oh, Daniel, you were serious about that? Oh, you should have told me. Now it's too late. You're like, well, when I asked you last year, you said it was too early. Yeah, it was. But now it's too late. Well, when the F was it the right time? You never mentioned it? The truth is, it will never be the right time. It's always the wrong time to think about stuff like this, which means we as founders have to take it as our responsibility to take this stuff seriously so that you actually get the company that you want to build. That's what's so interesting to me is people think they can divorce this stuff from their vision, but your vision includes the company being a force for good in the world. If you want that, you better fight for it or you're not going to have it.
When talking about doing good, it seems like you defer this to founders to at least like set their intentions early, just because of the subjective nature for good.
Yeah.
Is there a reason it can't be defined?
Ooh, now that's a good question. I'll give you the answer I give at the beginning of the book, and then I'll give you the answer I give at the end of the book because they're different, and I did it this way on purpose. So spoiler alert, skip this part of the podcast if you want to read the book. You don't want to spoil it. Because the truth is the true beauty of living in a free economy, a market-based system in a liberal democracy. For as long as we have that, we should cherish it, okay? The power of it, the strength of it is our diversity. Not surface level diversity, but the fact that we have different organizations that reflect different values. That's amazing. What an accomplishment. If you think about human civilization, there was a long time when we didn't have that, when people felt like to be in society together meant to have a monoculture of values, and we know all the problems that that causes, war being the least of them. We have the ability for every organization in our economy to be a little bubble of utopia according to somebody's preference, somebody's idea of how people, the power relationships between people ought to be. How cool is that? So yes, every company, my view, should be allowed to specify how it is trying to maximize human flourishing. And then they should bear the competitive consequences of their choice. That means there'll be companies out there who I disagree with. Like, in fact, I tell the story of Costco. One of the famous stories about Costco in the book is their famous $1.50 hot dog. If you don't know the $1.50 hot dog, the short version is, since 1986, Costco has sold a hot dog and soda combo outside their stores for exactly $1.50. When they started doing this in 1986, a California Big Mac at McDonald's cost about $1.60. Today, a California Big Mac at McDonald's is creeping up on $7. A Costco hot dog is still $1.50. This is not a loss leader, by the way. They have done so much extra work to vertically integrate their supply chain so they can keep this price target there, And very famously, one time the COO told the founder, Jim Sinegal, that they needed to raise the price. And he said, sure, if you raise the price of this hot dog, I will effing kill you. Figure it out. Very famous story in Costco lore. So anyway, it's a humble symbol of the promise that Costco keeps. Now, by the way, you want to guess how many of these combos they sell in a year? More than every Major League Baseball stadium combined. 200 million a year, which means if they could add $1 to this price, they could put $200 million straight to the bottom line. Boom, like that. That's what Jim Sinegal calls the heroin strategy. You do it once, next thing you know, it'll be $7, But think about this story for a second. I have a friend who I mentioned in the book. He's a lifelong environmental activist, and he's a vegetarian. And he thinks this story sucks. He's just like, a hot dog? You're making a symbol out of a freaking piece of processed meat? That's disgusting. It's bad for the health. It's bad for your environment. He hates that story. He's just like, how dare you put, and I'm like, look, man, I'm not putting Costco up on a pedestal and saying they're God's gift to humanity. I'm just saying they're a company who embodies this principle. Companies have to be allowed to have different values. Otherwise, what are we doing here? Right? So that's the answer at the beginning of the book. But if you read carefully, you will see that there's all this evidence in the book that purpose-driven, mission-driven companies that have this alignment with human flourishing, they gain these unbelievable competitive advantages. They have a fundraising advantage like you wouldn't believe. They have talent advantage. They have customer loyalty advantage. They have partnership advantages. I won't go into the mechanics of it unless you guys have questions about it. But it's almost unbelievable. Like, some of these stories are too good to be true, but I promise you that I got the data to back it up. Okay, I'm not making things up here. What's interesting, when we get to the end of the book, you ask yourself, where does this competitive advantage come from? And it turns out, if you study, not every set of values and not every mission is equally good in terms of activating this competitive superpower. Because I actually happen to believe, I'm a universalist, I believe that human beings are evolved to share a deep, deep longing to be of service to each other, to support each other's flourishing. And there are certain universal values that I think, if you're a smart leader, you will encode them into your organization. But that's not the same as saying, I think you should be required by law to do so. See? So I think it's important that we be able to understand both perspectives and bring them to bear. But neither perspective is really compatible with the shareholder primacy doctrine. So that's just got to go.
Costco's hot dogs are incredible. And I do want to say that I admire your restraint with avoiding the temptation to define doing good. It's tempting. You're in a position of tremendous influence. You could mold the world a little bit to your definition of good. I imagine it was tempting, a little bit like the ring in Lord of the Rings. But you've been on this mission for 20 plus years. Lean Startup, LTSE, now Incorruptible. If 50 years from now, exactly one of these ideas or any of the ideas from your career outlives you, which do you think it would be? And which do you want it to be?
Yeah, you can't ask a writer this. I don't know. I have zero ability to predict these things. And, I hope, to me, running through all of my work is a simple idea that organizations should be humane and scientific in their decision making, that like human flourishing should be at the center, that human progress is possible. We're not victims of fate. We have the agency to change it. We have the tools, the scientific tools that we need. If I'm known for anything remotely related to that, I'll be delighted to hear that. Although, yeah, probably it'll be some funky, dumb thing I said one time that, became really famous.
Thank you so much, Eric.
I hope this is good. Yeah.
Yeah, this was amazing.
Please do tell people to go to the book and send them to incorruptible.co. And if there's anything I can do to convince you guys to like literally walk into a local bookstore.
Go buy 20 copies and I'll just give them out to my friends and be like,
yes, that's what I want.
That's
that. You absolutely just made my day. Thank you, Daniel. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Eric.
All right, take care.